Greetings, it's Teleologic Jones, back with another video. This is the beginning, I hope, of a series of teaching videos, laying out some groundwork for the works that I've published in Cosmological Physics. That's one way that you could describe them. They are a different approach to the material processes of the Earth and cosmos than that according to the gravitational tradition. And because of this, then they're quite foreign, it would seem, to people, even to people who I think would be quite keen for the work that I've done to be verified, because what this work does principally is it affirms traditional faith in the creation account of the cosmos. In its full sense, it restores that. And I don't mean it does that by anything other than pulling, well, it's not entirely true, but its principal or initial effort is in pulling the rug out from underneath. The reigning cosmology, which is a materialist cosmology. And we have, for a long time, been subordinate to this materialism, as if scientific inquiry itself were necessarily only able to engage in material inquiry, which is not what the traditional understanding of the Church Fathers was. That material inquiry will always be limited, and at the edge of material inquiry we will find the divine intentions, and we will find the divine being acting upon the material world, both in all aspects, both in its creation and its sustaining, but also in any other special circumstances of action within the material world. The divine intentions are not just notions that we put on top of material processes as if they were summaries of material processes, but they are the essence of being of the material world. We don't have a material world without God, and therefore God's presence will be seen, even in a sense quantifiable, in the material world. And this is an idea quite foreign, and in some ways maybe it seems controversial, as if what I'm saying is that we can measure God. No, I'm not saying we can measure God. But within the material realm, well, we see in the material realm the limits of material inquiry. And I made this observation through a deep analysis of what is most commonly called gravity as such. That is, only in an analysis of the motion of objects to Earth and the phenomenon of weight as well. Just in themselves, what observations can we make about these motions, their quantities, interactions, the nature of their movement compared to the nature of other physical motions that we know in the world. Now, it's obvious that we have a physical motion, a material motion, when we're talking about falling objects, and we see that illustrated here. We have a physical motion of these three different bodies. Now, in this case, this is one mass unit, 8 mass units, 27 mass units, because the radius increases from 1 to 2 to 3. I believe that's how that works. And here we have time. So if at some given time, these three objects of these different masses, same substance, we're perhaps assuming, or at least it's the same density in each case. So a concrete ball, say, and at time 0, if they're let go, by time 1 they will all be at the same distance in some time unit. Now this could be seconds, it could be any time unit, it doesn't matter. All objects fall at the same rate. So this is the first sort of great underlying truth of the objects of Earth. They all have a common event. And what is this event? We'll leave apart weight for now. We'll talk about the active participation. What do we call this event? Well, we call it falling. It's really like no other kind of motion. It isn't pushing. These things aren't being pushed down, nor are they being pulled toward or pulled toward each other in a real solid sense of what it means to pull. It's not. There's the direction of the objects is as passive against an object moving while still making it move as any motion could possibly be. It's almost like, if it is not actually a rational directive rather than a material event. But I'm getting ahead of myself here. So we have an event. What is this event? Well, it's falling. That's the only term we have for it. It's not. And in this falling, there's a speeding up. We're not going to deal with that right now, but there's a common acceleration. So each time interval it's going a little further, it's getting faster and faster, but all objects of mass, all things being equal, and not taking into account the presence of air, which will begin to slow things down, air molecules will. But if these were all in a vacuum, they would all fall at the exact same rate, regardless of mass. And they all speed up. So, what is the cause of this event? That's the question. The falling is, what is the cause? Something is moving. The falling is not the cause. The falling is the effect. And so, because the falling is the effect, so is the acceleration going to also be the effect. It's motion in all respects, or their motions in all respects, is the effect of some cause. Now, what is that cause? It's often the cause that's given, or not often, the cause that has been given for several hundred years now as the reason for the motion of objects towards the center of Earth is gravity. Well, what is it? What is gravity? I mean, we say that gravity is the cause of the motion, but how is it causing motion in this way? Across all objects of mass, same effect of falling, same speed, no matter which size. This runs contra to our intuition. I've had a several hours break here in the not live stream. So just catching back up with myself here. We have an event, which is the falling of objects. The cause of this event is said to be gravity. Well, what is gravity? What is its being? That is, what is its ontology? And there are, as it were, two options. The being of gravity. We know that the falling object is a physical, a material event. These are objects of mass, they're made of matter, they're moving at a certain rate, all consistently moving. So it seems to be a physical or material event. Yet the cause is not seen. There's no visible cause of this motion. And yet still, as in the case of magnetism, it could be a material or physical or meta material, or even to some extent magnetism could be described as a metaphysical event, though I think metamaterial is a clearer description. Or it is immaterial, that is metaphysical. And this is the big divide we have in the current scientific ideology that we live under, and that in the church, even at all levels, we have learned to acquiesce to the physical. And this is the source of naturalism, which is the source of, or the root of modernism. And, of course, evolutionism. And it really rests on our decision, or it can rest on our decision here, as to how we see this cause. Is this a merely physical cause, or is the cause outside of the physical, that by a rational directive we see objects move? I don't expect to answer that question right here, right now. I've done that in my work, I believe, quite successfully proven that it is in fact an immaterial or metaphysical force that causes things to move, which is by definition a divine force. And that this motion that happens between objects in this way, that all objects fall at the same rate, and that all objects possess their own weight, or a weight proportional to their mass, and exceeding, if it's not in some way, if we cannot bring it ourselves to define it as being the ideal relationship, it is an ideal relationship, such that objects are reasonably weighted based on and weighted across scales in terms of volumes, as we see here, with these spheres increasing in diameter from 1, 2 to 3. We see the volume changes here of the sphere. But it doesn't matter how big it gets, it's going to fall at the same rate and possess its current or its mass quantity as its weight. But more with these initial videos, I want to focus on this issue of naturalism, that we are so often in our inquiry, scientific inquiry, and since scientific inquiry has become the dominant epistemology, such that we will no longer say that things are true unless they're scientifically affirmed as being, in being. But the scientific school that is followed, even by Christian scientists and physicists, is one that puts the material first. And this is just in a way, in that the physical should always be our first inquiry. When we're seeing some event happening in the physical world, we want to understand perhaps the causes of that event. We should look to the physical causes first, because that's reasonable. It's reasonable to suppose that in nature things operate according to set rules and conditions, because, well, we've discovered this through our study of nature. But I'm going to get back to this later. So we started with the event falling, and we asked a question as to its cause, and the normal, the given word for describing the events of objects moving to the center of the earth is called gravity. And then we asked the question, okay, so what is gravity? Now we know that gravity, in the theoretical sense, not just merely in the observed sense, but in an explanatory model used to explain it, says that it has a material or a physical cause. That's, in other words, gravity's being, the influence of gravity is from within the material and physical world. And then there is another, and this is understood as contrary to the idea that it is an immaterial or a metaphysical affect that causes the effect of objects falling to earth and objects having their weight. So this is the big divide that we have in a lot of contemporary scientific inquiry for sure, but even philosophical inquiry, where this side is not considered to be really true and cannot be true in any real sense. It's only a kind of a summary of events that we might see over here. This is what is true. Now, this includes also energy, because it is increasingly understood that the material world is energetic in nature. This does tend to push us more towards the kind of the immaterial and the metaphysical, which we will see in time. But regardless, the scientific consensus is that there is thoughtless process that is material, thoughtless processes, which are the results or properties of only matter and all of its attending or substantial energies that hold it in being. So to back up and answer this question, for our gravitational question about whether gravity, or as if you've seen my material, I prefer the word earth intention, but I'll use the term gravity in this video only because it's the familiar term, but I do mean to make a case for something that is so unlike the Newtonian tradition, that I eventually will dispense with the use of the word because it's only brings in confusion. So, to answer this question in terms of the human capacity to determine the difference between a material, physical, or immaterial metaphysical cause of any kind in nature, we ask the question, well, what can we know? And this is being a big part of the development of modern philosophy has been perception theory. What can we know? Well, we're material beings, so it is claimed, only, so it is claimed, and that we have a material interaction with other objects only, so it is claimed. And so when we look at an object of perception, in this case, a tree, so we have an object of perception, this tree, and we have a perceiver. And in this case, we've called in some big guns. We've called in Aristotle to perceive the tree for us. Now, I'm not an expert in any aspect of Aristotelian perception theory, but as far as I understand, Aristotle was a perceptual realist, as were basically everyone. That Aristotle, when he is over here looking at this thing, he's going to say, I see a tree. And this is the perceptual realist perspective, which was the common understanding until the modern times. Whether it didn't start exactly with Descartes. It started with some of the medieval philosophers, Scotus, I believe, and that all we can know are our perceptions. But in this earlier form, more intuitive sense, well, here's Aristotle. Here's a tree. Aristotle is looking at the tree. He recognizes it as a tree, and he says, I see a tree. So Descartes comes along, and others, and he says, hold on a minute there, noob. You don't see a tree. The tree is outside of you. How did the tree get inside of you? What is it that is actually inside of you? I perceive a tree. I don't see a tree. What does that even mean? But I perceive a tree. That I have a perception of an object. I don't have possession in any way of that object. And no certainty in understanding my perception of that object, other than that it is what is inside me, and therefore is entirely subjective. It's not objectively grounded in the tree, in its substance. It is only here, and of course we know it is only here in the perceiver. And of course we know Descartes took this even further. This is not really our subject here, to question all perceptions and say that the only thing he can know is that he thinks of a tree. He can't know that even that he has a body, or that there is a tree outside of him that he is thinking on, because all he can know is his perceptions. But if we back up and we look at the thing in itself. Even most doubters these days are not so doubtful as to suppose there isn't something there. But they will say, and this is linked with nominalism, that we can only know it by our perceptions and by our claims about it, that we make some nominal claim. We say tree. And that's not in any way the thing in itself. The tree as tree, not only as tree, but as this tree in this location, which we might be able to see. So what we have now is the initial reception of a tree into a human being in some way such that they can say either I see or I perceive a tree, is through this sense organ here, which is an abstract of the eye, which is identical to how a camera works. And that this is the point at which we have a reception or perception of with the visual organ, which is the eye. There's other means of perception. There's smell, there's taste, touch. We know the five senses in which we perceive the world and what its qualities are, what its weight is, what its textures are, what its colors are, and so forth through the senses. Well, in this case, in the eye, we have the light coming in from the tree. It's inverted through the lens, such that the top is at the bottom and the left is at the right, and the bottom is at the top and the right is at the left, and backwards and forwards, so that this is an inverted image which is cast on the back of the eye. Now we can say at this point, or at least we can assert, that no thinking has gone on. In fact, no conscious perception has taken place at this point. It may be that there is some consciousness in the eye, in the nerves, but I'm speaking more in this process here. The process that gets us from a tree to an image of a tree on the eye is not a conscious process in any sense that we really understand that word. There is actually a third party that's mediating this, and that's the sun and its rays. So these rays are coming from the sun, bouncing off the tree, coming through the lens, landing on the retina at the back of the eye in this image. And if you actually look physically into an eye in the right conditions, you can see the image on the back of the eye. It's a physical imprint not imprint, but it's a physical projection through the simplifying effect of the lens. But we don't. Neither do we Christians nor scientists. Atheist scientists describe consciousness to the sun itself. So this process of light coming out is not in its action, any given action, a conscious process, other than that the sun has been placed there consciously by God for this purpose. So it's not like the sun in its being has no conscious, or shall we say metaphysical origin. But in this case, we're saying here just this relationship. We have the sun, it's producing light, the light is bouncing off the trees, it's going through the lens of the eye, and it's being received on the back of the retina. And we'll say at this point, other than any prior consciousness, such as the design of the eye, all of the conditions that make this actually function, all of those things, we're going to say it's not a conscious process at this point. Now we know eventually from the object through the visual selection. There are nerves that connect to the brain, and back in this area of the brain in particular is where the visual information goes through and is processed. And at this point, then, we have in some sense the tree is inside the person. Now, this is a very reductionist view of this in the sense that I'm assuming that it's inside a brain. No, certainly not as a tree. It doesn't enter into the brain. It enters into it as something that's much more like information being sorted physically in terms of the activity of the soul. Well, that's a whole other question, which we may get to here in a little bit. So now we have a concept. I mean, it could just be the word tree, but in some sense, the person has, the perceiver has internalized the external such that they can react to it. And yet, from the perspective of a perceiver, where is the tree to the perceiver? Well, they're going to say it's here. It's out here. Tell me, where's the tree? Oh, it's there. I point to it. I don't say, oh, the tree's in my brain somehow. My brain is having a conscious relationship with the tree through the organ of sense, through perception. But it is not physically in my brain, or especially, it's not sort of in my visual cortex back here, though it is in a way, in that the light information was cast onto the retina. The retina cells interpreted the light, which was sent here, which organizes things such that because of manifold experience, I have an understanding of the objects. The cells in my brain have learned how to perceive or to conceive from perceptions. The perceptions were there purely as much as the eye functions. There is a reception or a perception, but in terms of conception, that takes some time and some interaction. And so, further to this, we have the human capacity at larger conception. Not only the long-term conception to understand that, plants like this we call trees. They usually have a trunk and some kind of foliage, though many varieties of trees exist, not only of this kind of deciduous or seemingly deciduous kind of tree, but pine trees and all manner of trees. And sometimes it's difficult for us to tell the difference between a tree and a bush. But generally speaking, this is our, almost lollipop tree kind of shape here. So it takes some time, but we learn, and we have a concept of the tree, and we may just have the word tree come into our mind, or we may have, what is this kind of tree? Not really, it's so generic, it looks almost. Anyway, so, or we may have a specific kind of tree. Maybe we say this is a ginkgo. It's not quite the right color, but anyway, so we say this is a ginkgo tree. And we may have some considerable experience with ginkgo trees. They may mean a lot to us. So now we're going to have another response to the tree. And let's say we had ginkgo trees lining our driveway up to our house when we were kids. That's going to be a deep impression that has a lot more to do with all kinds of other things that go on within a human being than merely this abstraction of the perception by perception account. And then we also may get so far as this poem here by, well, not so much a poem, but the last line of his poem entitled Trees, I believe. Joyce Kilmer, who was an early 20th century Catholic poet, I believe, killed in the great waste of human life called World War I. This is a higher level understanding of this action of perception, or at least this summary of a lifetime of these kinds of perceptions and perceptions of other objects, we have only God can make a tree. That we have, when we experience trees more fully, and in every way, maybe we analyze them in terms of cells at this point now, though Kilmer seemed to be writing more just from the point of view of outside observation, that trees in their own right, as trees, without any microscopic conception, speak of their divine origin from his perspective, and I must admit from my own as well. So we have a thing in the world, some kind of thing which exists in its own right. It has some kind of being, it's some kind of substance. We assume it's the same substance or being, ground in being, that also the human eye has, and the human brain. And yet this thing is able to be received by the eye because of the projection of light from the sun bouncing off of it. It is received by the eye in perception, or reception becomes perception somewhere along this line to the brain or to the interior. And then at this point then, within the brain and also within the soul, is the point at which we have some kind of concept of the object we perceived. And due to our human nature, we attach meaning to the tree above its mere color information and value information it gives us in terms of its mere visual information as a projection of light into the receptive organ, which then has the perception of that particular location, which then becomes a concept of some kind, concept of a tree, or of trees generally, families of trees, whatever we're doing inside here, inside the human person. And I'm sorry to have this reductionist brain-only thing, but we have within the person, we have all kinds of things that are going on. Though through this process, the eye itself can't allow us to see. It has to be continuous, because if we sever the optic nerve at some point along here, or confuse it in some way or damage it, then we're no longer seeing these things. Although this is the purely mechanical, as it were, aspect of the act of, or an act of perception, and then a conception, and then we can have higher conceptions, higher concepts, such that we've seen so many things, and we decide that at our wonder in so many different perceptions and conceptions we've had in life, that only God can make a tree. And this is, of course, a much higher level statement than mere conception of, oh, there's a tree. So let's simplify our discussion a little bit here. So we have things in themselves, objects, physical, material objects. We have some means of perception. I put this upside down in line with the visual perception, but this is really just to mean that this thing outside is somehow being brought inside through some window in the case of the eye, or through some means of understanding this object. In the case of touch, it would be, if the light bulb had been on, it would be hot. Potentially you can burn your fingers even, or just at least warm. Or we know that if you squeeze it too hard, it will crack and break. So you have to be sort of gentle with it. So not only do we use our eyes, but we use other parts of our body, our hands, But even then, even more so, let's say we're lifting something heavy. Now, this isn't just simple touch. This is a complex sense of touch, which involves the entire body. We have a sense of how much strength is required in our legs, in our arms, in our back. So we perceive the object in manifold ways. And the object is there, a thing in itself, and the things that we discover about it are true to it, in the sense that they are true interactions that we have with it through our perceptions. So it's not that we don't know anything about the object once it gets into our selves, and we have some kind of concept of it, the concept being heavy, or reminds us of our grandmother, or might be a good way to make money, or perhaps that's stolen, or all kinds of conceptual, deeper conceptual or higher level concepts we might have of any given object. But the perception is the first conscious moment that we understand, that moment at which the mere reception of the light information or the light phenomena, reaching as it approaches and reaches our retina, at some point along the nerves to the cortex, and then even to the occipital lobe, and then also to the frontal cortex, is where these associative ideas are going to be taking place. So there's a lot of communication that seems to be represented or mapped upon the brain. Well, there just seems to be. There is a lot of information out there as to locations which seem to be at least principally required for certain brain functions. So if it's a matter of touching the thing, then that's the perception that we're going to go through, rather than, this is in a sense touch. We're being touched by, through this filter, we're being touched, this ocular filter, we're being touched by the light that's coming from these different parts of the tree, giving us this by our experience. Our nerves have been trained in order to perceive that. So we can say tree. At the moment we say tree, we've had a perception. Actually, by the time we've said tree, we've really had a conception. The moment we recognize some object there, it comes into our conception, into our perception, we've had a perception. Into our mind, we've had a perception. As soon as we begin thinking about it with any kind of complexity, we're reaching ourselves up to only God can make a tree, or that's like the tree in my front yard when I was a kid, or I can pick almonds off that tree, or whatever sort of concept of the tree that we may have. But does this mean that we are so, forever isolated from the objects of sense? That this amounts to a chasm which we can't cross. Well, the idea that we can't cross it is absurd, because we're crossing it all the time. We're constantly engaging with objects around us. Sight is, in a strange sense, is a passive sense, and yet we call it looking, which means, from this point of view, we're looking for something to perceive in order that we can satisfy some concept often. That doesn't mean the process of the eye is active. It's the person placing themselves where they need to be in order to see the object. But this is all part of our complex relationship with the world. Where do we find trees? Well, we don't, other than certain kinds of them, we don't find them in the mall. We find them maybe in city streets. Sometimes we find them in the forest. Depends on the kind of tree we're looking for, whatever object we're looking for. And so our knowledge of the world is quite extensive. We know a lot about things. Now, we may not be able to cross in. Let's say we look at the tree. we may have seen another tree cut and have an understanding of the rings of a tree or other aspects of the, let's say we've looked at trees or tree cells under a microscope. We have a concept of through that act of perception, we have a concept of what it means for there to be tree cells. Just because when we're standing here looking at a thing as itself, in the case of this light bulb, doesn't mean the information we're receiving from it is not true and is not of itself. We do know things about the thing in itself. Can we have total knowledge of a thing? No. And this is where the Cartesian resentment, I'll call it, starts to come in. It's like I can't have absolute knowledge, therefore I'm going to claim I have none whatsoever. I'm going to put it all over here and say that, well, I can't even know if these things are out here because all I can know is what is in here. All I have is my perceptions and then my subsequent conceptions. I don't have this thing. And yet, if we've looked at the tree in our front yard growing up all our lives, we've seen it even grow with us. We know something about it. We know where it is. We know what it feels like. We know that it's strong enough for us to climb in and such. And we learned things about it that maybe nobody else knows because we've climbed up to a certain point. We understand what it means to be up in its uppermost branches, what we can see. To say that these things are not knowledge of things in themselves and knowledge of ourselves interacting with the material world around us, the physical world around us, is sort of, it's what I often refer to with these kinds of philosophical doubt systems as public school boy fantasies. They're musings. They're creative. They're intelligent musings, but they really don't function well because that's not how we live. We trust all the time that the objects of our sense actually exist. We trust that $20 bill in our wallet actually will be received as a $20 bill when we go to pay for something. We trust that. I mean, in a scientific age, it's really kind of hard to understand how this concept really still has so much endurance. But it's due to this kind of resentment with not being able to know everything. Therefore, saying, all we do know is this. But in truth, if you separate yourself from this and make this thing potentially the spawn of an evil demon, or just some kind of projection, or nothing real, but just itself, something unknowable, and therefore maybe artificially projected into you because you can't know it in itself as having some kind of enduring substance. Or as Russell said, you can't know that the whole world didn't snap into existence this instant. And the only reason you have a sense of past is because that sense of past was instantly snapped into you. So these kinds of doubt systems are of limited value because what is our goal as beings is to know the world, at least to what extent we can. And science claims to know the world and say that, enduring, why are light bulbs able to manufactured by the millions or billions? Because we know the thing in itself. We know the glass and its nature. Sufficient enough to use it in this way. We know about metal and its nature. Sufficient enough to use it in this way. We know about electrical conductivity. Even if we misunderstand entirely what electricity is, we know enough about it that we can use it to make a functioning light bulb. And so we know a lot about the things around us. There's a certain amount of faith in that, but of course, that we don't need to be sullen or dismantle realist perception because our realist perception is not omniscient. We are not omniscient beings. We will never be omniscient beings, but we can continually ask questions of objects to learn more about them, because we have the ability to inquire into their being in different ways, through either just simple personal observation, personal assessment, picking it up. Is that light bulb hot? Is it cold? Is it still functioning? We can sometimes see whether the filament's cooked, or if the light bulb's blackened, we know what that means. These are all true indications of the nature of things that we can know through our conceptions, which we receive through our perceptions of the material things in our environment, such that we can know things in themselves, but we can't know everything about things in themselves. And so this initial conversation, I think, is important, as it will lay the groundwork for what we will be looking at in terms of analyzing gravity, according to the distinction between whether the gravitational effort or earth intention is a material physical energy, or whether it is an immaterial metaphysical energy. And so these basic introductory ideas about perception will become clearer why this is important as we move along. But mostly I wanted to initially make a case for realist perception, limited realist perception, non-omniscient realist perception. I hope you enjoyed this. Thanks for listening in. If you've listened this far, I wish I had a cookie. If you've listened this far, thank you very much, and I will be moving on in the next video, as I said, to talk about gravity in particular, and the perceptions that we use to understand its being, or how we receive its being through our perceptive or our organs of sense. Teleologic Jones out.